You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
Welcome to another exciting edition of the Shoe and Show podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Priest. I'm joined today by Sandi Mines. Sandi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
That's good to hear. As always, Sandi's always great, and I think she'll be even greater after we dive into this conversation, because on today's program, Sandi, we have a thought leader in our industry and across a variety of different industries that allows us to really gain insight, pun intended, into what the consumer's thinking and how the industry is navigating some of the really critical issues of our time. And so without further ado, Sandi, who's on Shoe and Show today?
Yeah, we're really excited to welcome Greg Petro, CEO of First Insight, as our shoe-in guest today. He has been on before. He's a longtime friend of FDRA's. A lot of people work with him, and we're really looking forward to gathering some new perspectives on what's happening with the consumer and shopping trends and sustainability and so on. So I'll kick this conversation off by first of all welcoming Greg. Thank you for coming on our show today. Thank you, Greg.
Absolutely, and excited to be here, Sandi. Matt, always good to see you, or speak to you, I should say.
We'd love to hear a little bit about some of your research and some of your findings in terms of what's happening with consumer attitudes regarding inflation. I know you have a very strong perspective on this and a lot of great findings. So tell us what you think.
Well, the data is indicating interesting events occurring in the consumer market. As you think about it, all consumers are bound by some budget and some budgetary constraint, income levels, et cetera. And when inflation occurs, it affects every income level. What we're interested in seeing recently has to do with the fact that every income level has changed dramatically in some of their behaviors related to the products that they're transacting against, right? And the frequency of those transactions. And it goes across multiple industries, as Matt was speaking about, from the home market, right? Obviously, we're seeing that with interest rates coming up as well. So these are compounded by the inflation rate factors. But also, when you think about that, cars, et cetera, when we break it down into the industries of fashion, apparel, footwear, those dynamics are occurring at different socioeconomic levels. So we're seeing certain brands and a bifurcation of the market of brands where there are clear winners and clear losers in the market, or those that are being more challenged. And I think that relates very specifically to a value proposition that comes about in the products that are being offered. When inflation increases, the cost of the product increases, but also its percentage into the total basket spend of a consumer. And so consequently, as that increases, and we've not seen a deceleration in categories that we're talking about, right? I mean, we've seen it in some of the food categories, but in fact, across all the other categories, it's continued to increase upon some of the staggering increases that we had in 21, right? And so consequently, unit velocity may go down, but actual revenues may increase because of the price of goods. And what a consumer then takes when inflation occurs is very simple. They look at each transaction more specifically. And I think that's why we're seeing certain organizations struggle with increasing their revenues, because as they've had to increase costs and absorb that margin or pass it on to consumers, the value prop is misaligned with customers' expectations.
Well, let's reset like our mind around what's happening in the economy, right? If you wind the clocks back to this time last year, Greg, we were probably all anticipating some kind of recessionary environment where growth had slowed significantly and was in the negative, right? At least 2 quarters of GDP negative growth, if you will. And that hasn't happened. So the consumer is super resilient, and the consumers met the inflationary moment at each step of the way. I think we're starting to see some softening in certain aspects, but at the same time, with high interest rates, it's people might not be buying as many homes, or maybe even not even automobiles, but don't have that issue necessarily with footwear. And so footwear and apparel sometimes see this resiliency even in a recession. So the fact that we're in this 2024 where the consumer's still plugging away, unemployment is historically low, 4%. What are your expectations on the overall economy and how that is informing your clients and our members as to the best way to navigate and price around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. As you think about it, and we wrote about this in our Forbes piece that we have been writing about for now almost a decade. We didn't anticipate and we didn't see the recessions that everyone else was calling out. And we were talking about that at the end of 22, actually. And during that period, we did have a slowing, but we didn't really have the recession. Part of that resilience really came from the fact that unemployment, full employment for many people, the need for hiring and actual increase in wages occurred, right? Consequently, people had the ability to spend. That was compounded by some of the investments made by the administration, right, that actually fueled that employment as well. And actually, previously, it added dollars to people's bank accounts that allowed them to spend. So when you think about post-COVID, there were 3 fundamental stages. One was the pause and then the reaction back to the event of COVID. The second stage was the supply chain disruptions, and then the inflationary period that created, along with the compounding of dollars flowing into the economy at a pretty high clip. And then the last piece is the flow through or stabilization. And that, I think, if you look, and time will tell, the 24 is the first year of really that, I would call it normality, right? Business has now settled in. And our suggestion and the things that we've talked about and written about has simply stated that the consumer is healthy, yes, but at the same time, when you look at an individual, they're being constrained by increased costs, increased inflation. The average bank account has gone down precipitously post-COVID, right? And the balance on credit cards is at one of its highest rates. So people have been spending. They spent through what they saved, right? And now they're back into the credit card situation while they're about to be facing very high interest rates. So that's, I think, causing everybody to pump the brakes and sit back and look at and not try to understand, okay, what do I really need to invest in now that I've spent my money in my home and I did some of the things that I wanted to do. And I think, quite frankly, it brings us back to a period of time where people are being very judicious in their decision making.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think that leads me into my next question about the dynamic customer, the VOC. Talk to us a little bit about those topics and maybe some of your predictions on where we're going. We know where we are right now. We've seen why it's happened and what's made us shop in the way that we do and look at prices in the way that we do and pull back in certain areas. But what I'd love to hear about some of those topics and some of your predictions.
Yeah. Well, I would say we're in the data business, so I can share with you the data, Sandi, to your point about what it's indicating and why it's indicating that as a suggested idea for our listeners to think about what to do about it. Here are some of the data points that we need to think about. Number one, the consumer has continued to create a fragmented market. This is something that I think most people have overlooked and not considered, in the sense that a mega trend, to use a term that's way back from the 80s, I think, or 90s, a mega trend that occurred and has continued has been this fragmentation through social media. It is the communication of humans now about trends and interests that exist in microsegmentations, right? And when you think about a brand or a company serving a customer base, they need to think about how many microsegments, not who their customer is, more simply, who could be their customer, and understand why, right? That's a very different approach. It used to be a top-down approach on here's my customer, and then I want to get these segments of customers. It's far more the behavioral specifics that you're trying to understand, and the influence piece related to groups of people, smaller groups of people, and then trying to figure out, do you have a business that can actually support itself, right? Do you have enough people that want your product? That's one piece. That is not to be overlooked, right? Or I can't stress it enough, just simply because the amount of work that we're doing related to understanding how consumers have changed and the frequency that they're going to continue to change at. The one comment I would say is the word agility should be the strongest skill set that a company should have going into the future, because consumers pivot on a dime now, right? I mean, we've seen trends change dramatically or pick up significantly in a nanosecond. And I think trying to understand that on an ongoing basis, you have to have a mechanism for it. As it relates to what the data is suggesting going into the future, one of the things that we've always looked at is a term or a data point called a value quotient. And what a value quotient isn't necessarily the fact that a product or an item or a brand has a lower price, because that necessarily isn't value if you're selling very high-end products. It's, are they willing to absorb the fees, costs, and structures of your business in totality embedded in the product and experience they have with your brand or company? And what that means is, if I'm buying a pair of beautiful Christian Louboutin shoes and they're costing X amount, what does that mean related to the total value from a consumer base? And are there enough? And is it trending up or down? And what we've been able to see is that value scores have continued to drop across the industry, the footwear industry. And that, to me, is a startling, now that's an aggregate number, not specific to a brand or company, right? But I would say in general, what it indicates is that there's some dynamic occurring, and it could be an aggregate that the industry as a whole is not creating some innovations or newness that it needs to do to bring to market. But generally, as a total business, we've seen those numbers go down, and that is disconcerting to me because our numbers are forward-looking, not rearward-looking, right? They're forward-looking indicators. Now, I will tell you, in general, we've seen that same factor occur across apparel, and we've seen item velocity decrease, as you well know, right? Doesn't mean that the revenues haven't increased, but there's a clear bifurcation in these markets between those that are hitting the mark and those that aren't.
Greg, let's unpack that agility concept a little bit more as it relates to how competitive the marketplace is. There's a recent Washington Post article not too long ago that was highlighting finally some of these mass retailers are providing some real cost savings, and I think Target announced price reductions on over 5,000 items, and even the fast food restaurants are going back to value meals, which we haven't seen in a number of years now. Mm-hmm. And so not just footwear, but across the industry, particularly in the mass space, pricing is hyper competitive. You know that better than anybody. Where does the agility with the consumer and how you just, so you articulate so well kind of where we are from a comms perspective as it relates to engaging with the consumer. How do you build an agile system that moves with the consumer with data from First Insight, while at the same time making sure you're hyper competitive and you're keeping an eye to your left and to your right of you as to what your competitors are doing in the marketplace as well?
Right. Yeah. It's a really, I think, important point as it relates to authenticity of your company. Here's what I will say. It seems disingenuous for a company to announce all of a sudden that they're going to lower the price on a lot of products. It sends a message to the consumer that, hey, I was happy to take your money at that period of time, and now I need you to come back, right? Not picking on a particular company, I'm talking about the tactic of lowering prices. Specifically, what I think about is you have a value prop related to a product. We had a client who raised their prices 2 times within a singular season, and full price unit sales did not decrease. Still have maintained themselves over the current fiscal year, and will probably likely continue. And I think because that's related to the value prop that company has related to the customers that it serves. It's unfortunate that you have companies that have to lower or promote products specifically, right, in a way that says, hey, listen, what it's indicating is we made a mistake. We made a mistake in identifying what the demand was going to be. And I'd say, that's currently for us and our organization at First Insight. One of the things that I tell people is you spend a lot of time and money and effort on supply chain, which has a great term, supply. Go get the product, figure it out. How much money do you spend and consider on trying to understand demand, which is the consumer? And the issue that companies have is price is a lever for demand. It is an absolute 100% correlated metric that accelerates demand. The problem is it doesn't indicate sustainability. We'll talk about sustainability as well, but from an authenticity perspective, it seems to me if you're selling a product and you expect to sell, 80% of it at full price unit sales, and then you need to promote it to liquidate the balance of the inventory. If you understood demand clearly on that product, you'd set the initial price properly and you wouldn't have to lower it. And I think that's the objective. The second objective is to not buy so much, right? And then figure out how to balance that. That'll have the single largest effect on sustainability, right? Because liquidating inventory really has an enormous impact to the environment, which is just a matter of bad decisions.
Do you want to talk to us a little bit more about if you feel consumers value sustainability when they walk into the store, if they're looking online, are they really looking at sustainability overall in terms of their purchasing power?
Yeah, I'd love to share more. We've invested quite a bit across all areas of the industry around sustainability, both for our customers as well as the industry as a whole. I was pretty proud during COVID that we were the company that created insights for the industry, and we provided it free of charge around what the customer was experiencing during COVID, what they wanted during, the opening of stores, and it was shared by the media. And I think it hopefully helped people to try to understand how to approach that. We did the same approach with sustainability starting back actually in 2018 and did an enormous amount of research with the Baker School at Wharton, University of Pennsylvania, around sustainability. People can download those reports. They're free. They're on our website. You simply need to provide your information so that you can access that. But ultimately, here's what we've seen. Number one, everyone thought that, Gen Zs are going to lead this charge. What we saw in the last 3 years is a rapid acceleration in every demographic group, every age group. Baby boomers have caught up and in some cases surpassed the Gen Zers in the sustainability, a desire for organizations to have an approach related to sustainability. Now, here's a couple things that we've learned that I think are fascinating. Number one, not only do the demographic age groups align now at more than 80%, which means everybody's essentially on board. The second thing is every one of them has indicated they don't want to pay for it. So you now have to figure out how to engineer products with that factor in. They basically have said to companies, that's your job to go figure out, but be responsible. The facts of the matter are that there are hundreds of millions of pairs of shoes that are destroyed every year. And I think the first thing that we can do when you start to think about it, we have people looking at how to make them. It's that we're misaligned supply and demand. I mean, it's that simple. Number one, if you want to be a sustainable company, you have to have an understanding of how much to make and how to, maintain your inventory levels, even though you may be profitable, because we've seen this in other categories like apparel where companies got, I would say, the consumer was frustrated with the fact that they were either burning or destroying inventory, right? In some way, getting rid of it. And I think while companies aren't doing that today, they need to clearly understand a metric of how to align supply and demand so that they don't have that waste level. And I know we have great things we're doing as part of FDRA and some of the ecosystem players. I think it's great from a social impact perspective on how we're helping people. But I think at the end of the day, really, the companies need to be responsible for trying to figure out how to align supply and demand, because that's the number one factor.
Yeah, that's a great point, Greg. I'm glad you articulated that. And that's where First Insight comes in, is tracking that supply narrative. I like that notion of you invest a ton in your supply. Why not invest equally in your demand expectations in your forecasts? As we close out this conversation, our listeners should know if they go to shoesustainability.com, they'll find a consumer engagement report that was a partnership between FDRA and First Insight around sustainable terms and what do you use in the marketplace and what consumers gravitate towards and what they shun, they shy away from as it relates to the terms that we use to engage with consumers. And that's still available. You can request a copy of that via shoesustainability.com. Greg, as we close out, this has only happened a couple times, I think, in the life of this podcast, which is now pushing 450 episodes, where we've had a published author on, and I know you've had a book recently published. Why don't you tell our listeners more about the project?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks. We're excited. We are launching our first book called The Tyranny of Now, and it really revolves around, the rush to act. I'll call it, and the desire to take control. So we did a lot of research over the last several years and basically synthesized it down to a book that I think will help inspire many people. It's really not a business book. It will help anyone from friend or family member to yourself. I think it's intended to, certainly I'm not an expert in all the fields, but took the time to research and find those experts and some of the salient things from everything from regretful decisions to how to control your smart device and how that helps in decision making. So there's a lot of, I think, wonderful aspects to the book, and we're pretty pleased with it. You'll be able to find it at all the major outlets, I think, for the 4th of July holiday or somewhere thereafter, as well as Amazon.com. So thank you so much.
That's awesome, Greg. I look forward to cracking it open. I like to read. I read a lot, and I look forward to adding that to my library. So, Greg, thank you for coming on. Thanks for sharing your insights with us and helping our listeners better understand the importance of navigating the current marketplace, understanding the consumer, and then investing in that demand side of the equation, which is so critically important to an industry that brings in 2.5 billion pairs of shoes every single year. So we appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.
Yeah, folks, this has been another edition of The Shoe and Show. Go to shoeandshow.com for all the great episodes. You can download and listen to them all. We ask that you subscribe, spread the word, and we look forward to having you back next week on Monday for another exciting edition of the program. And until next time, Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.